In this video, I wanted to take a look at an Iron Hand Space Marine list that's been making a big splash in the competitive 40k scene over the last couple weeks, but instead of just talking about it by myself, lonely in a darkened room, I actually brought on the architect of the list. And today I'm going to be interviewing Fouchini as he talks about his Iron Hands list that he brought to the Kent GT as well as the London GT. Fouchini is a prolific member of the online 40k community and has put up a lot of big wins in Tabletop Simulator, coming second in the T5S2 Invitational that ran last month, and is a superlative Space Marine player and familiar face around the Tactical Tortoise Discord. So with that, let's get into it and talk about Fouchini's Iron Hands list. Let's do it! Today, I'm talking to Fouchini, who came second place at Kent War Games GT. Fouchini, thanks for talking to me. We're going to go over your Space Marine list.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so you've been sort of tearing it up a little bit. We'll call it low-key tearing it up, I guess, since in-person events have opened back up in the UK. You have 2 X and 1 finishes in the last 2 weeks, is that right?
Pretty much, yeah.
And then that's coming off the back of a second place finish in the T5S2 Invitational. So with the basically unchanged Space Marine list, I think you are currently 14-3 in competitive events in the last month or so.
Yeah, pretty much.
Which is, I mean, I think that's a pretty impressive record, especially sort of at the GT level, and one that basically anybody would be happy to have. A lot of people have been a little bit surprised about the archetype of list that you've been playing, so I wanted to talk to you about your games from Kent and talk to you about the list in particular. I'll just do a quick recap of the list that you played in that event, which I believe has been unchanged in all of your other events.
Yeah.
It's a Iron Hand successor Space Marine list out of a custom chapter with Born Heroes and Whirlwind of Rage. It comes in with a patrol and vanguard detachment, so you can open up some extra elite slots. In that patrol detachment has a tech marine with upgraded with target protocols, an infiltrator squad, 2 company veterans with chainswords, 1 redemptor dreadnought, an assault squad, which I think some people will be surprised about, a Devastator Marine squad, and an Eliminator squad, alongside a drop pod and a land speeder storm in those dedicated transport slots. That Devastator squad is 3 grav cannons and 1 multi-melta. And then to fill out that Vanguard detachment, we have a Primaris Lieutenant, the Indomitus Lieutenant with the cool shield and the sweet gun, a bunch of dreadnoughts, a second Redemptor dreadnought. This one, 2 Gatling cannons. The first one was a Plasma Eradicator, and then a Relic Contemptor dreadnought with all the fixins, upgraded to a hero with March of the Ancients. He gets a Warlord trait, Merciless Logic for exploding attacks on 6s. He's bringing, of course, the staple, 2 Twin Volkite Culverins, as well as a Cyclone Missile Launcher. We have a Scout Squad, so just the much maligned infantry options out of the Space Marine Codex, right? Coming out of the woodwork here, as well as 3 Vanguard veteran squads, 2 with Lightning Claw Storm Shields, and 1 with chainswords, just double chainsword on everybody, as well as an Eliminator squad with a Bolt Carbine on the Sergeant, and a second Devastator squad to go in that drop pod. So could you talk to us a little bit about the sort of general game plan for the list, how it typically plays in a normal game of 40k?
Sure, yeah. I mean, the list pretty much has kind of 3 aspects to it. There's the Dread Castle, which pretty durable. You know, there's a Tech Marine there to heal them, pretty efficient at shooting. It's all OBSEC as well, which is great. And then you have the second component, which is the Order Flying Infantry, which is why I actually have Assault Marines, because they can fly, they can take jump packs. And with 17 attacks that hit on 2s of exploding 6s, they can pick up a Witch Squad, pick up a Toughness 3 character, you know, and they can go out and score me those primaries and secondaries. They can score Engage, Domination, order down my opponent's primaries by stringing out to the Lieutenant. And then there's the third component, which is the forward deploy, so the Infiltrators and the Eliminators plus the Drop Pod. So those 4 deploying units allow me to have early board presence and screen out my opponent's forward deploy if I win the roll-off, so I can have optimal placings for the drop pod. But there's pretty much how it works. Like each component supports another, and they kind of need to deal with the entirety of a certain component in order to move on to the next.
Yeah, that's definitely fair. Like in order to have any control over the midboard, you have to deal with those forward deployers, which often means that you're in striking distance of the faster stuff, and then those are
Mhm.
sort of screening for the dreadnought castle that you called it, the three dreadnoughts sitting in the
Yeah.
back and pumping shots downrange.
So yeah, so the Dreadnought Castle basically supports the flying infantry in order to make sure that the flying infantry makes it to the midboard and to my opponent's deployment zone. The flying infantry is there to make sure nobody gets too close to the dreadnoughts. I don't like people touching my dreadnoughts. So if stuff gets too close, Vanguard vets with lightning claws go in and literally tear stuff up. And the drop pod somewhat supports the dreadnought and the other infantry by absorbing fire when it comes down. And the infantry supports it by making sure if somebody wants to tag that drop pod, they get charged by some Vanguard vets, and that's never nice.
Because once that drop pod comes down with the two Devastator squads in there, it is an expensive module. 360 points, I think.
Give or take.
Yeah, but you're guaranteed those devastators to shoot when they drop in, right? And then your opponent has to deal with them because if you get a second turn of shooting with all those
Yeah,
devastators,
no, never ends well.
yeah, it's gonna go poorly. So it's basically a distraction Carnifex that also is guaranteed to deal some damage because your opponent can't interact with it on turn one.
Pretty much, yeah. It's better if it comes down in cover because now that Devastators are 2 wounds, all of a sudden you can't just kill them with some random bolters, especially if they're touching cover with 2 up save. It's like, oh, my Scutari shot into you and I split fire. I've killed only 3 models, and they're like, oh, okay.
Yeah, and you're like, I'll pull the guy without the heavy weapon. There you
Yeah,
go.
yeah.
Good job. What do you think are some examples of good or bad matchups for the list? Are there any particular factions that you're worried about getting paired up into versus are there some factions that you feel that you've teched appropriately for?
Well, there's the big three, the big three scary factions, which I'm pretty sure people are comfortable know of. Admech, Drukhari, and Sisters. Those three are probably the ones that you have to play a better game against because if you make like one small mistake, they can just start to steamroll you, and that's never fun. But 2 other matchups that people wouldn't expect it is actually Grey Knights. Grey Knights is probably the one if I play these Grey Knights and I see they have all the right components and there's a heavy board, I if my opponent knows what he's doing, I'm just screwed. And the other one is Custodes because honestly, the list is fine if as long as you have your rerolls. It's fine like efficiencies, the Dark Angels, Terminators, with Perma Transhuman, etc. But the main problem is denying those rerolls, and then there's an invuln on top of that, and then all of their stuff has like a 3 up or 4 up, and it's just and -1 damage, so it's just incredibly hard to chew through, and it's all upset, which is also very very annoying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Grey Knights is an interesting one. I don't know if that's the one that I would have picked to be a particularly poor matchup, which is funny because you actually played against it. So we'll talk about that matchup a little bit more as we get into your matchups. The question is probably burning in everyone's minds. Can you talk about the inclusion? We've touched on it a little bit of both Scouts and Assault Marines. These two units that are much
knew this was
maligned by
coming.
the community.
Well, Scouts and the Submarines because they hold the list together, you know what I mean? They're the fundamental parts of the list. Without them, I don't know what I would do. No, but honestly speaking, the Submarines, as I said, it's a 4th jump pack unit that's relatively cheap that
Yep.
can kill like a 5-man witch squad, kill a succubus because you can always do Hammer of Wrath and do mortal wounds on a 3 up. It can score engage, it can deny primary. It's 100 points, so you don't care if it dies.
Right.
And there's still Space Marines if they're Space Marines that can touch cover.
Yeah.
And in some matchups, some boards you can deep strike them for free and just use them for rod.
Yep.
Scouts, now scouts, these guys are great because the main problem, right, with Space Marines is that if you go first, off of moment becomes really hard to score in the middle, especially if there's not a middle objective. And usually Space Marines want to take off of moment. It's just a great secondary because you're guaranteed to max it if you go second, and then you still have good chances of scoring it if you go first.
Yeah. The drop pod list tends to have such a big bump in power if it goes first because you can top of one that
Yeah,
drop pod.
exactly. Yeah,
Oath of Moment being better if you go second kind of shores up your matchup, so you're not
yeah.
as worried about that turn one roll, I think.
Correct, yeah. Like that's actually one of the reasons why I take off for a moment. I have a drop pod, so if I go first, I can usually alpha strike an opponent because I've as I said earlier, I've created the gap with the forward deploy. But if I go second, I can just go off, and it's still fine points wise. And the drop pod is still going to come down 10-1 usually, so it's usually not the end of the world.
Mhm.
But yeah, so I think I did this in in my game against Drukhari at Kent vs Conrad. Great opponent, by the way. I went first. Shocker, shocker. He had no forward deploy, so the drop pod came down and shot at wherever it wanted. Managed to pick up, I think, a total throughout my shooting phase, like 3 Raiders, Trueborn, like 8 for Hellions,
Mhm.
some witches. Yeah, just a lot of stuff. And what was in the middle of the board that nobody wanted to deal with is scout speeder with actual scouts inside. So I just scored myself some awful moment because nobody wanted to shoot at the scouts. And then what was really important was that after during my turn two, is the scouts were able to disembark after land speeder had moved and shoot some witches off an objective, which meant that the succubus that was also on the objective was able to be shot by a contempted dread, which meant 0 primary, which was big in that matchup in the end because
Mhm.
the score differential wasn't too much. So yeah, they're just a nice utility piece that can shoot toughness 3 to pieces because it's loads of strength 4 shots that are assault weapons, so they can advance and shoot if needed.
You're sort of giving Drukhari a taste of their own medicine there with the storm speeder in the center that you have to kill and then kill again because you have to remove the unit that's actually inside.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And nobody wants to do that. And because it's 7 wounds, it's going to take more than usually a Dark Lance. So nobody wants to shoot 2 Dark Lances into a speeder
Yeah.
because it's like they'd rather shoot a Dread and do some damage to it.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's the case
That's
for
true.
Cognizance cannons and auto cannons,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it's just an
exactly. They
awkward
have to dedicate
wounds count.
they, they have to dedicate a whole chicken to it.
Yeah,
And now with chickens losing their rerolls outside of Mars, they're like, okay, there's no point shooting this thing.
right.
Like, exactly. What's the point shooting this thing? It's 55 points. And it's not tabling me.
Yeah,
But another thing is like because of the 18-inch move, it's like you can just score engage comfortably with it. And with the including the disembark, you can go 27 inches with the scouts. So you can usually max rod, especially if you put the assault marines in deep strike. You can one side with the scouts, the other side with the assault marines. All of a sudden, you have 12 points in a matchup where usually scoring secondaries would be hard, like battle line.
a good example of where just having access to these fast, cheap utility units. I mean, relatively cheap. They're Space Marines still, but
Yeah.
utility units that are disposable but give you access to those secondary objectives, I think, is really powerful.
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit about why you have or elected to take a successor chapter, not regular Iron Hands? I know standard Iron Hands tends to be one of the more popular chapters once you're locked into a supplement. Not a lot of people take a successor because they're the 6+ damage ignore roll across the army on Iron Hands is, it's a pretty good chapter tactic to have.
It's, it's solid. One, I really wanted to be Space Wolf without actually being Space Wolf, so that's one. I wanted the damage output in melee because the thing is with Iron Hands, they already shoot well enough with just the warlord traits, the relics they have access to, and what's it called? Just the stratagems they have. They're already a very efficient shooting army, and they're already pretty durable with a 5 for no pain on demand on any unit outside of your vehicles. So in my mind, it just felt like I don't need to bump up my durability or my damage in shooting. What I really needed was more damage in melee because realistically, Marines need to operate in almost every phase, like shooting and melee, to be really competitive at the moment, in my opinion. So yeah, that was just one of the reasons because 5 Vanguard vets that go in, 21 attacks with lightning claws, hitting on 2s, exploding 6s means they can act independently. They don't need to stay within a castle for a reroll, any rerolls, auras. So, they can go in, wipe out a Scutari squad, or just do mass amount of wounds to a knight, or just anything really in the current meta. Outside of Custodians, because those guys don't have rerolls. But yeah.
And I do think it's important to mention the one combo, especially with those Vanguard veterans, that's very relevant.
Yes.
There is the interaction of Mercy's weakness plus
Mhm.
the Whirlwind of Rage. So
Yes.
you're gonna explode your 6s to hit when you charge, and then you Mercy's weakness, and you with the rerolling attacks because of lightning clouds, you then explode all of your 6s to wound as well. And with that 2+ to hit, you're hitting potentially more than 100% of your attacks, which then explode into like 110% of your attacks.
Yeah.
So the
So mathematically, with Mercy's weakness, if I'm going into, let's say, a Space Marines that are toughness 4, those 21 hits should equate to 21 wounds. 4s rerolling, 6s explode is 100%,
mm-hmm,
or like 98 something, but it's round up to 100. So
mm-hmm,
you're averaging 20 to 21 wounds usually. And even if you're going to touch something that's like toughness, what's it called? Toughness 8, it's still six sixes, and then with Mercy's weakness, it's actually 12 wounds. So you
Right.
can do
Literally
12
doubles
wounds
your
to a knight.
damage.
Yeah, it's literally double your damage. It's insane.
Yeah. Seems pretty good for 1 CP.
Pretty nice.
Yeah.
It is pretty nice.
And then obviously that stratagem still has use in the shooting phase, and I think that's just it's a good
Yes,
example of Iron Hands being flexible enough to operate in every phase.
correct. Iron Hands are definitely a shooty chapter for sure. But they are also hands down one of the better melee chapters, up there with Space Wolves and White Scars.
We touched on it a little bit, but we haven't talked about it in depth. Before we move on to your games, I think it's important to talk about kind of the linchpin of the list, which is this Relic Contempt or Dreadnought. Can you give us a rundown of the Wombo combo that lets this guy sort of transform and roll out into an absolute killing machine?
Yeah, so the combo is the tech marine for the +1 to hit, so it hits on twos. Outside of Devastator Doctrine, you can spend 1 CP to roll him back into Devastator Doctrine. So he all of a sudden his Volcats have AP1 again. So against a 2-up save, you force him to a 3-up, so it's literally double damage. You have reroll ones because of Devastator Doctrine, gives you reroll ones of your heavy weapons. He has the sixes on additional hit. Because you're hit on twos rolling ones, it's basically at that point an auto hit. So all of a sudden you can have your crack missiles explode. I've had, I think in one of my games this week, last weekend actually, I had my 2 crack missiles explode into 4 wounds, which was hilarious. And you combo that with target protocols usually on either him or the Devastator squad to give him a reroll damage roll, reroll hit roll, which he doesn't really need, and reroll wound roll, which is nice on the crack missiles. And the reroll damage is basically a free CP reroll, which is again amazing. You essentially with that water trait target protocols, you get 15 CP rerolls throughout the game, which is amazing.
Yeah. And it's worth noting that this guy potentially can benefit from almost exactly the same combo as we just talked about with those Vanguard veterans. So he's shooting
Oh yes,
like
yes, yeah, yes.
like you mentioned, his sixes explode into almost an additional hit. It's a high volume of attacks, 16 shots from the Volkites plus all the missiles, and then you can Mercy's weakness to explode those on your wound rolls as well. Now the explosions don't deal mortal wounds, just the
No, I
just the
wish.
initial shots, yeah. But that's
Wish that was
extra AP1 2 damage wounds that you're
correct. It's
forcing through
it's
on the opponent.
it's it's just value, right? Because you go from 16 shots to around 19 hits. And of those 19 hits, if you're shooting at like stuff like Skatari that are unbuffed, you do like more than 20 wounds. It's just money.
Right. And then I think the most important thing to talk about in this combo is that he is a character. So he can be lookout Surd for, and
Oh,
I think
baby,
the
it's not just like answer.
the pièce de resistance
Baby,
is those 2 company veterans there hiding behind a wall somewhere in your deployment zone.
yes, yeah. So, well, actually, one of the changes I made to the list was I gave both of them stone shields.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, if they're behind a wall on a 1-up save, so all of a sudden the non-ladder side that's prevalent in the meta, that's AP1 or AP2, they still have a 2-up or 3-up against, which is, perfect. Because usually I found that every single time the Dread has survived, I've just won those games. Because he's just going to table a quarter of my opponent's army alone, usually, which is great. It's nice.
Yeah. For those who aren't aware, that's just because of their bodyguard rules. So if they're within 3 inches of him, he becomes completely untargetable by ranged attacks. So it's not just lookouts
Correct.
or it's just you straight up you can't attack him. And then
And
if you can't see the company veterans, obviously you can't shoot them. So if you don't have indirect fire or a plane, basically, then they just stand there and make him
he just shoots. Yeah, pretty
uninteractable.
much.
Yeah.
Great. Fun and balanced.
Yeah.
It's completely fair.
Super fair. So I guess from there we'll go on and start talking about your games, your individual matchups that you had. I guess I should mention this is a 43 player event. There were a couple recognizable names there. I know you mentioned Konrad
Yeah.
Bartkowitz, who has won many GTs in the past. Glorak from the Obsec Tactics YouTube channel, who we've streamed a billion times on the Twitch channel. He was also there. So a couple pretty strong players in the mix. And like we teased a little bit before, your round one was maybe a matchup that you didn't necessarily want to see because you got matched up against David McGeever's Grey Knights, consisting of a single battalion. It brought a brother captain, a chaplain, as well as Kaldor Drago. We had 4 strike squads and 1 Terminator squad, a big 10-man. Terminator Brick, a 9-man Purifier squad, some Servitors to perform actions, an Interceptor squad, which I always like to see the inclusion of. Those guys are pretty cool, as well as the 3 Purgation, the Suicide Purgation squads with silencers, 3 of them with 4 silencers apiece.
Well, going into this game, a lot of my teammates were like, "Oh, you should be fine. It's Grey Knights. The stars are aligning for you." And me, deep inside, I was just terrified. I walked in there. I was like, "Oh my god!" I was like,
You're
"Holy!"
like, not like this.
I was like, "Fuck!" Yeah, because I was like, "All right." Like in my head, I was like, "Okay, I'm gonna. It should be fine. If I go first, there's no forward pro. I can alpha strike him." And then I see the map, and I'm just like, "Oh, there's just a massive L for him to hide behind. Interesting." I was starting to get nervous. I was like, okay, so I need to win the roll off. I need to win both roll offs. The first one to get the side with the slightly bigger L, and 2 to also, go first. Got none of those.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, got none of those. Luckily for me, my opponent, he didn't know exactly what my list did, which is going to be a consistent theme throughout my events. They knew what the drop pod did, of course. Drop pod haunted many people in H. But I think the biggest part was that he was still inexperienced with the list. If I had gone against, let's say, somebody like Richard Siegler of that list, or somebody else who had a Master of Grey Knights, I don't think it would have been the same result at all. Um, he just made loads of little mistakes in the psychic phase, even with secondaries, and I think the biggest part was secondaries, but also the fact that he combat squadded his Terminators into 2 5-mans. That's when I was thinking, okay, this should be okay. Because initially, what I was terrified of was 40 shots with Astral Aim at Strength 5, AP 2, Ignore Cover, Damage 2, because that can just pick up all of my Vanguard bets in a turn.
Yep.
And that's no bueno.
It speaks to the fact that Grey Knights are a very difficult faction to play. Not only are they relatively squishy and expensive, but the sequencing of the psychic phase in a Grey Knight army is like you have to be absolutely perfect with your decision making,
Right.
and then you also oftentimes you don't necessarily have to get lucky with Grey Knights, but you have to get less unlucky because if you roll a bunch of Snake Eyes in your psychic phase, it can go very poorly for you.
Yeah, then yeah. It's probably the most finesse army there is out there currently, if I had to say.
Yeah.
More so than Harlequins. The Harlequins are more advanced in charge more than anything, but yeah. It's a really finesse. Like I think he only made like the guy during movement and everything only made a couple movement errors, and like you said, he failed one of his big powers. He put interceptor squads in the open, and he planned to empiric domination them back into outline of sight, and then he failed the power. Yeah, Edict, so he tried to do that, and he failed the power with a CP reroll. So I just got that squad for free. Yeah, it was a great.
Yeah. And I guess you have a little tiny safety net. It's like jumping off a building and having your fall broken by like one of those little kiddie trampolines. But you do have access to Souls of Iron, right? So if he does cast one of those big powers in 24, you potentially have the 2 CP 4 plus an eye.
I hate that stratagem with a passion.
Yeah, it's very inefficient for sure. But if you need it, that's it.
Yeah, I was honestly willing to. I was going to use it if I had to. Luckily, I was like, I think I've only ever used that strategy 3 times, and it's worked all 3 times.
Wow.
So I know, right? Free. But I think was it called? All the games I played, I've only used it like 3 times. Yeah. It's just such a gamble.
So ended up taking that one down 99 to 54. So a pretty significant win in your favor. And that moved you on to round 2, where you did play against Conrad, like we mentioned before. He was playing Drukhari with a relatively standard version of Drukhari. We have a bunch of Hellions and some Chronos making their appearance. So this was a Cabal of the Blackheart Patrol. We've got the Archon with Ancient Evil. We've got the Kabalite Trueborn. We've got 5 Raiders with Dark Lances, as well as some Incubi. Following that up with a Cult of Strife Patrol that's got 2 Succubi, one with the Precision Blows Razor Flails, the other one with the Triptych Whip, another unit of Incubi, 2 units of Hellions, and then a little bit of a blast from the past, a Dark Technomancer's patrol detachment. That's bringing 3 Chronos with Spirit Siphons, as well as a couple more Incubi. The one auto-hitting weapon that can still make use of that Dark Technomancer combo. Yeah, how did this game go for you?
Well, I went first.
It's a good way to start against Drukhari.
Yeah. So, secondary wise, I remembered 2 out of my 3 secondaries. So, turn 1, just completely forgot to place down 3 banners. So I think
Oh
throughout the
boy.
game I missed out on 9. Yeah, I missed out on 9 points of banners because I just forgot it turn one. I was like, oh, it's no good. But yeah, outside of that, my turn one was pretty successful. Drop board came down. Vanguard best position behind it. So if he tried to tag it, it would have been bad for him. I had order 4 deploy. He had none, and that was helpful. Ended up going first. Ended up killing the Treeborn Raider and the Treeborn inside. I think I said earlier, like 6 Hellions, give or take.
Hmm.
I killed another 2 Raiders, so I killed a total of 3 Raiders. I killed 8 out of the I think like 10 witches inside of one, and I killed some out of the other one as well. Then that was basically my first turn. I just had all the board, scout speed in the middle, forgot to place down banners because we're good at the game. Here's turn 2. I forget that Corp the Archon can advance and charge turn 1. So that was fun. So the drop pod was tagged, and so were the Devastators. There was an immense battle between the Devastators and the Court. The Devastators, shockingly enough, did not win. He attacked my top flank. He sent a Succubus and Incubi trade into my Eliminators. Wasn't the best trade for him. And Succubus ended up killing, I think, 3 Vanguard Vets, the Triptych Wit, because, reject the flesh, embrace the machine. 5 for no pain was great. And then my turn 2, I scored 15 because his Archon failed to kill my infiltrators. So the Archon went in, swung once into my infiltrators, didn't base me. So I did just a nifty trick where my infiltrator piled in closer to the Archon
Hmm.
and equidistant to the Raider that was next to him, and then I consolidated out, and then he couldn't fight twice into me. And then I passed the leadership test, which was no good for him.
Yeah, and then so that's because the Splinter Genius fight twice requires you to be in engagement range when you activate it, and
Yeah.
he wasn't in engagement range because he'd piled out.
Yeah,
Then
exactly. So
he's
I did that nifty little trick, and then I scored the 15 because of that, which was nice. And then I look at my secondaries. I'm like, oh, I'm scoring 2 out of my 3 secondaries. What's my third one? Oh, banners.
oh
Oh, this is not
no.
good because he's now because I was controlling the objectives that I was on, but he had models on them. So I was like, oh, this is no good. Just right off the bat, the company veteran placed on a banner in my home field objective. I was like, let's get to work. Um, and then the game basically it was a mediocre snowball. There were some tense moments, but I ended up giving him 2 0-point primaries for 2 turns, which was helpful. I ended up getting a primary lead and secondary lead. Managed to kill all 15, all 3 of his while we stand. So I killed Rizar in the end. I killed a 3 Chronos, and I killed the Trueborn, as I said, turn 1. So he ended up getting 0 for that, which was helpful. Drop pod was on one of his table quarters. So funnily enough, that was denying him a Herd of Prey for
Hmm.
like 2 turns. So that was also nice. So he didn't max Herd of Prey. I forgot what his other secondary was. It was Retrieval Charizard. He got 8 points on that. So yeah, it ended up being a close game. It was really fun. I always enjoy my games of Conrad.
Yeah, so that ended up being a 68-55 win to you. So
Mhm.
with even without the banners, you squeak by with a with a 13-point win. So with the banners, it would have been more one-sided, but definitely still a close score there. Moving on, we could sort of continue the trend of Eldari, and you get paired against Tristan Spencer's Harlequins. This is a Soaring Spite Harlequins list, so we're advancing and shooting fusion pistols in the transports with the Shadowstone, the Incarn, so a little bit of a Yanari splash, the Choreographer of War Troopmaster, as well as 5 units of Harlequin troops with 5 fusion pistols apiece. One has 4, I should say. A Death Jester with the Harvester of Torment, Shagarax Lament Wombo combo to blow up 9 infantry every time it shoots. 2 units of 5 Skyweavers with Haywire Cannons and Zephyr Glaives, as well as the 5 Starweavers to carry all the Harlequin troops around. Sort of a little bit of a meta army of yesteryear, but nice to see
Mhm.
Harlequins returning to the table. How did this game go for you?
So he ended up going first, and the secondaries were like the standard ones: the engage, the banners, while we stand we fight, or
Mm-hmm.
just I think he ended up taking assassinate against me just because he knew he had to get my characters eventually. So yeah, he went first, killed a lot. To be fair, I was sweating. Killed like I think 600 points, turn 1, and I was like, oh
Oh damn!
yeah, I was like, this is no bueno.
Is that
He
just
actually forgot.
with the Skyweavers getting stuck in? and those fusion pistols
Yeah,
potentially on the dreadnoughts.
luckily one of my dreads actually survived. So I saw he shot at one only with one of the squads.
Hmm.
Almost killed it. I had to spend the feel no pain, thank God. It didn't live by much. He actually did the correct play and he killed my land speeder and my scouts inside, and basically effectively two of my eliminator squads. The submarines and an infiltrator squad. He left an infiltrator on one model, so the squad was basically dead. So yeah, he killed a lot of my like fast moving stuff. So I was a bit nervous. I was like, oh, this is good. He forgot that my character Dread was untargetable, so he was going for a charge. I just told him to go back because you can't shoot him. He came out the gates swinging hard. I was sweating, and he put all the defensive buffs as well. So he hit hard and he was ready to get hit back. He had a free up invan on the bikes next to my castle. The drop pod comes down, of course, turn one. I just forgo banners and stuff like that. I'm just trying to go for max damage. A Contemptor got perfect line of sight onto one of the Skyweaver units. This one only had the 4-up invan, so he shot into them with Mercy's weakness and just eviscerated the squad. I think he almost killed him two times over. He left me a gap to shoot his Incan, so the first thing I shot, of course, was the Devastators into the Incan. Killed it with, I think, the first Devastator squad
Oof.
volley. So I was asking him, oh, what's the save on the Incan? He said, it's a free up. I was like, oh, it's a free up
A
save.
3-up, you
Uh,
say?
yeah, yeah, I was like, oh, free up. Grab everything into that and just multi-motor did like 4 damage. And then the grab just finished it off. And he
Yeah.
was like, yeah, I'm not gonna CP roll. You still have more shots to go to. I was like, yeah, that's probably the better play to go for. We rolled it to see if he would have if the Incan would have died. It would have died anyways. I also killed on the left hand side the transport and what are they called? I killed the transport and I moved blocked the guys inside from disembarking onto my objective, even the 6-inch, so he couldn't get a 15 on primary.
Hmm.
So I was hitting him pretty hard back. And then going to my melee, this is where the fun begins. This is where the combo where we talked about earlier with the Vanguard Vex with Lightning Claws goes in. So I said charging two squads, one with Lightning Claw, one with Double Chainsword. The Lightning Claw squad end up doing, I think, like 22 wounds. He bosses up the free up. Effectively, he had only one bike left, and double chains was just mopped up. So yeah, he ended up losing both bike squads, the Incan, two bolts, and a troop and a squad inside, and some more troops from the other one. From then on, the game was basically steamrolling out of control, and he had nothing to go after the Contemptor anymore.
It sounds like maybe a little bit of an overcommittal from the Harlequins that got punished. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I'd say that's relatively fair, but he did make me sweat.
Interesting that the Incarn went down so quickly. Had it just like sort of gone in, and you were able to get the Devastators
Well,
in close
so
to it.
yeah, I think he must have guessed that he screened his backfield.
Hmm.
And all of my guns would have been outside of the Incan range, outside of the Contemptor, and the Contemptor doesn't really want to shoot at the Incan. He wants to shoot at a bike squad because it's the
Hmm.
best thing to kill in the bikes. But he left me a gap with the Devastators, and he had no one within three of her. So I was like, okay, go, go, go.
Gotcha.
And yeah, she just ended up getting sniped basically by some
Yeah.
Devastators.
Brutal. Well, that was a pretty convincing win to you, 98-40. So looking pretty good moving into round 4, where you got matched up against James Marsden, and this is the first of the dreaded Adeptus Mechanicus matchups of the event.
Yes. Yeah.
This one, a relatively interesting Adeptus Mechanicus list, definitely non-standard. It had a core of a Lucius battalion, bringing a Scutarii Marshal, one Dominus, and one Manipulus, and actually no reroll ones to hit thing on the Scutarii Marshal. I forget what that's called now, but I guess that's why the Dominus is in the list.
Yeah,
But
he had it.
yeah, that bringing 80 Scutarii Rangers in that Scutarii in that detachment, 2 units of 20 Vanguard, 2 units of 20 Rangers. So a good split. Following that up, we have a unit of Infiltrators, 1 unit of 10 Rust Stalkers, 1 unit of 3 Iron Strider Ballistarii with las cannons, and then 2 units of Sidonian Dragoons, which I'm interested to see, as well as an Archaeopter Fusilier. So sort of a non-standard Adeptus Mechanicus list. I mean, as non-standard as Admech can get. We still have all the Scutarii. We still have a couple Iron Striders. We still have some planes. So how did this game end up going for you?
Well, I went first, which was nice, and I'm just gonna keep doing this. I think he wrote a blog about it, and the first words he used were it was a humbling experience. I ended up killing 34 of the Scutari.
Mm,
Uh, I killed 2 of the Sindonia Dragoons and 5 infiltrators turn 1, and managed to blow all of his CP because he needed it for defensive buffs. So that was
whoa.
it was a strong start. Yeah, he because he spent the feel no pain in
Mm,
shooting and in melee, and he spent CP roll for a save here and there. and he used strats to try and
Yeah,
because my Vanguard vets made it into combat. Also, because it was the corners were only 18 away from each other, and I asked him, "Are these guys on the line?" And he said, "Yes." I was like, "Okay, my Vanguard vets are also on the line behind the rune." So I ended up going for a 6-inch charge. Through the feel no pain, I ended up killing I think 12 of the Vanguard. It was relatively brutal.
yeah, and there's
Turn one.
no programmed retreat in this list, right? Unless I'm missing it.
No, but he did have Artisan. I remember correctly. He had Artisan and Solar Flare. So his turn one was
Yeah.
he Solar Flared the fully buffed Rangers onto a container and had just angles on my entire army. He shot my two Devastator squads. He split, which recommended not to, since he was hitting on freeze
Mm-hmm.
that turn, not twos. Well, he started to hit the rerolls, but it was still hitting on freeze, which only killed a Devastator squad and a half because Feel No Pain is
Right.
great. So that happened. I still have Devastators into my turn two, and that was not good.
Yeah.
But I think what I was really impressed by was not the Dragoons. They were all right. They were durable with the managed not to hit, but was the Sonic Reaper on the Manipulus? That guy just basically one shot my Vanguard squad. The rest of the game was basically like after my turn one, they just snowballed a bit. My land speeder love tapped his Rangers on the container for the rest of the game because he couldn't fall back outside of engagement range and he couldn't shoot in combat. So that wasn't fun for him. My Contemptor shot into his chickens and left them on one wound. Yeah, and I think his turn three was literally Rastalkers come in, kill my Eliminator squad plus my Dread. All he had left was a plane that was off the board and those guys, and they tapped Ranger squad and some Rangers behind the wall, and that was pretty much it.
So a little bit of a taste of Adeptus Mechanicus medicine there, and that ended up getting you the win, 100-42. So another big, huge win. That sets you up for the second Adeptus Mechanicus matchup of the day. This time against David Gaylard, aka True, who is a prolific online player, plays a ton on TTS, both on our server and on other servers. So good to see True doing some work in real space games. A little bit more of a standard archetype of Adeptus Mechanicus. No Sidonian Dragoons this time, unfortunately.
Yes, no Dragoons.
We
Lord of
do
Dogs.
have a Forge Lord Lucius Patrol Detachment, bringing a Dominus and a Manipulus with 40 Scutari Eyes, or a unit of 20 Rangers, unit of 20 Vanguards, as well as three Cerberus Raiders. And then following that up, the rest of the list is Mars in a big Outrider detachment in order to bring 3 units of 2 Iron Strider Ballastarii, a unit of Sterilizers, another 2 units of Raiders, 1 of 9 and 1 of 4, 2 Scorpius Disintegrators, as well as a single Dune Rider. And a Scutari Marshal with the Exemplar's Eternity to give those rerolls. I think it is worth mentioning that this event happened before the Adeptus Mechanicus FAQ, so all of those Iron Striders were core at this point, so they could
Yes.
benefit from the Scutari Marshal's rerolls. I'm afraid to say this is your only loss of the event. I
Yeah.
apologize for making you relive the trauma, but
No, no.
how did this game go for you?
My Contemptor died. Yeah. If I just summarize it. This is actually one of the reasons why I put Storm Shields on the company veterans. Because the company veterans, despite a CP rule on a 5-up for no pain and -1 to hit, just died to his 2 Scorpius tanks, which meant his Rangers and Vanguard could shoot at my Contemptor, which killed it by 2 wounds, so not by much. So I just lost control over a flank, and those birds just being able to mortal wound and then just go away was really obnoxious. I think overall the game was definitely winnable. It was being mostly me slightly overcommitting with the Contemptor and being slightly over confident with having a free up to non-line of sight.
Right.
And if I have no pain with a CP reroll, because alternatively, if he had lived that turn, he would have been unshootable for the rest of the game, which would have been really big. And he would have also picked up a Skatari squad next turn, which would have started to swing stuff in my favors heavily. But well played to David in that game. Definitely shown Admech power.
Yeah, the Scorpius Disintegrators, they have the Strength 5 indirect. It's AP1, which isn't great, so that's why you're on a 3+ in cover. But it is 2 damage, and at the end of the day, the company veterans are only 2 models, so like
Yes.
they spike
Yeah.
a little bit, and then the unit goes down.
Which is what happened in the end.
Yeah, so I would you say that your mistake was just like not having us set up to just standard lookouts or the Contemptor that turn?
So I did, which is why his last cannons couldn't shoot me. It was just the Skatari. But man, it's a lot of shots.
Oh yeah.
It's a lot of shots at AP1 and AP2.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so I had Assault Marines actually positioned, and Vanguard left position so that he couldn't shoot unless he was at a certain angle, which was why most of his firepower couldn't actually go into the Contemptor. But apparently, two Skitarii squads is enough, so it's fine.
Yeah, the volume is really there. You know, those guys can kill whatever
Yeah,
because they have good anti
yeah,
infantry guns, but also it's just so many attacks that they can chew through tanks
yeah.
as well.
It's just so many. Yeah,
Yeah. So that one still ended up being a relatively close finish, 97 to 78. Not a great differential there, but still a good fight against Adeptus Mechanicus. Definitely, I think both shows, obviously the flexibility of Admech, but also the power of that Volkite Contemptor, because if that guy survives, you just do so much damage
oh yeah,
to the
yeah.
Admech army, yeah. And I
Mhm.
think one thing that we've talked about in the past, I'm not sure about on this video, but just the profile of the Volkite Contemptor or the Volkite Culverin versus Adeptus Mechanicus profiles is really favorable. You know, your strength 6, which is like really a good break point against that faction, because you're wounding Iron
Mhm.
Striders on 4s and you're wounding all the infantry on 2s. And it's a high enough volume, it's 2 damage, so the Lucius ability doesn't turn on, and you can deal mortal wounds, which, especially their infantry, get chewed up by. So if it is able to operate for the entire game without being shot, it's so much damage to the Admech army. And one thing
Yeah,
that we've seen, the weakness of the faction, a faction that only operates in the shooting phase, it turns out, is weak to things that can't be interacted with in the shooting phase. So
yeah.
if it's able to keep shooting, eventually you take it down.
Exactly. Yeah.
But that brought you to round 6. You are on table 2, so basically fighting for second place in the event. This was
Mhm.
against Darren Cooper's Death Guard, bringing a really interesting, like, just sort of super tanky Death Guard build. We have Mortarion in a Supreme Command detachment, as well as a Mortarion's Chosen Sons Spearhead detachment with a Sorcerer, a big unit of Blight Lord Terminators. So the
Yeah.
guys with the bolt guns, a unit of 3 Death Shroud Terminators, 2 Mephitic Blight Haulers, as well as 3 Plague Burst Crawlers. Yeah, how did this game go?
He went first. He
Uh oh.
basically,
GG.
yeah. No, no. So it was okay. It was okay. He plopped Morty in the middle, and with the way I positioned the objectives, I just put almost all my forward deploy on one flank outside my deployment zone, and I put the other objective far enough away so that only his Blight Lords, with how he positioned, could hold them. So I turned his Blight Lords into objective holders for the rest of the game, which was nice.
So this was
Um,
priority targets, is that right?
it was priority targets. Yeah,
Very
correct.
nice.
So this is an example of where I spent 2 CP to deny my asthma, which worked. Yeah, that was big.
Yeah, that
Yeah, I was just like, I was just like, he just did a pause. Like immediately, he did my asthma. I was like, okay, right off the bat, I was like, I'm gonna spend 2 CP for the night, clenching my butt cheeks. I was like, oh my god, if this doesn't work, it worked though, which was great. So Morty wasn't -1 to hit, and he ate my entire army shooting phase and then some, and he just died like a wimp.
So did you end up aggressively placing those forward deployers for the potential to Souls of
No,
Iron away the miasma?
no, 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 God no, 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 God no. He just moved his entire army forward, and I was like, ah, okay. Are you moving 24? Yes.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Cause,
I was also a bit
yeah.
shocked. I was like, ah,
Cause
could
he
just
so
keep
did he
that going.
cast it with Mortarion?
No, no, no. He
It
cast it
was
with the little
it
dude, I
was with
think,
the
which
sorcerer.
was
Yeah.
yeah, which was in the middle for some reason. So
Huh.
I was like, ah,
Okay. Yeah. Well,
yeah,
that's interesting.
yeah. I was like, okay, sure,
I
good job. Yeah.
can't, I can't say
Yeah, I was
I've
like, all right.
I've relived that experience very often. This is
Yeah,
usually a plague caster
yeah,
like towing like on my opponent's back table edge,
yeah, exactly.
cowering
18 inches
in the
away. Yeah,
back
no, no.
and
It was also the sixth, like our sixth game. We had 3 days, 3 games yesterday, another three, and it was the final game. Everyone was exhausted.
oh for sure yeah.
So, so I don't think everyone was
Yeah,
played optimally.
you're just you're in autopilot at that point. You're like, this guy runs forward.
Yeah, yeah,
He
yeah,
just
yeah. You're half an
casts
autopilot.
his
Yeah,
spells.
kind
Yeah, for sure.
of.
That's
Yeah.
definitely understandable.
But yeah, I ended up killing Morty turn one. Also killing one of the Blight Hoarders turn one of my Vanguard vets. Just Mercy's weakness, then it was dead.
Mm.
So I killed a lot turn one. His turn one killed 3 eliminators. The game was me trying to deny him primary and me failing to deny him primary, and him denying me primary for 2 turns. I only scored 2 5s, so I didn't get the full 15. Well, I did get full 15 last turn, but I scored 40 out of 45. Luckily, going second and priority targets and just how the mission worked
Yep.
just give you 45 secondaries off of moment, easy.
Yeah, with that
Stranglehold,
objective in the
easy.
middle,
Yeah,
and there's no objective secured in the Death Guard list, so
No,
The Rights
none
of
at all.
War just sort of
None
goes ham.
Yeah.
And I think that's emblematic of like one of the strengths of this is your list is very much an MSU style list. You know, a lot of 5-man,
Mhm.
like little 3 and 5-man units of Space Marines,
Mhm.
and can definitely make not only target priority really awkward. You know, there are some lists like a Salamanders list you can imagine has like a bunch of these big, heavily armored Gravis units that you want to dump a bunch of buffs
Shots
on.
into.
But obviously, like yeah, then your opponent can just point all of their guns at them. But if you undercommit or underperform into any of these little Vanguard units, and there's one dude who's like hiding behind the obscuring terrain who you just pull last, and he doesn't die, you know.
Yeah.
So you have the Vox Spiritum with that Rights of War aura
Yes.
on the lieutenant, and he can just
Yeah, boy.
put these really annoying little objective secured models wherever in the center of the table to fight over those middle
Pretty much.
objectives. Yeah, Mortarion going down early, it definitely feels like it would be a tough hill to climb back from for the
Mhm.
Death Guard player, and you ended up taking that one down 95-81. At the end of the day, put you at a 5-1 record, and
Yeah, boy.
actually got you second place with a total of 538 victory points. You were 44 points above the third place player, so
I think so. Yeah.
a pretty dominating second place there for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, congratulations on the good finish, and especially with Space Marines, who, I mean, the community tends to be pretty divided on Space Marines, whether or not they're the most broken thing ever created or they are absolutely terrible. The statistics have shown, you know, outside of like some Dark Angels and things like that, that Space Marines have kind of been struggling recently, and that has not been our experience, you know, at least in our server, because you keep killing people with this Iron Hands list. And
Yeah.
so between this and the GT that you played last week, where we mentioned before you went 4-1, is that right?
Correct.
We're definitely seeing the Iron Hands doing pretty well. Now, I know you mentioned a couple changes that you'd consider making to your list. The Storm Shields on the company veterans, for example. Are there any other revisions that you're looking at, or is this mostly set in stone for the foreseeable future?
I think it's more set in stone. I'm toying with a second speeder instead of the scouts, but scouts are pretty good. I think during the last weekend at the LGT Open, which was a very well run event, the scouts ended up scoring me 15 on primary, denying my opponent secondaries, scoring me secondaries. They were just like really, really useful utility pieces that I could use whenever I wanted, which was really helpful.
Yeah,
So I
and
think it's mostly set in stone.
it definitely changes sort of a second storm speeder kind of changes how that unit interacts, right? Because if you have the two storm speeders on the table, your opponent can just do things with them. But the scouts being in the first storm speeder means that you target selection is that much harder because you have to kill the first storm speeder and then also be able to kill the scouts, which is always really awkward. Now, are there any new releases that have been revealed or previewed so far that you think are going to be problematic for this list? You know, Orcs just coming out right now. I know you mentioned Grey Knights you think is already one of the toughest matchups for the list, and they're getting a whole new codex with a bunch of new abilities. Are any of those giving you pause?
I saw the new Grey Knight Astral Aim. Didn't give me pause. Like it was much reason for celebration.
It's
Losing the
much
Ignore
rejoicing.
because that was the main thing. With Grey Knights, Ignore Eyesight is this biggest weakness. I'm not sure with Thousand Suns yet, so I don't think currently.
At least from personal experience, a lot of the Space Marine list units, especially like the Vanguard veterans and the character protected dreadnoughts, they don't love psychic damage. So I could see, you know,
Yeah,
like Bodyguard doesn't, or in Lookouts or even doesn't protect you against
yeah,
smites if
I
they're
know.
able to
Yeah,
just get a bunch of good smites in line of sight. It's like,
correct. I mean, that's where the five assault marines and scouts inside the land speeder come from, right?
for sure.
Um, the storm can do the five for no pain, absorb some mortal wounds, and then even if they kill it, there's still five scouts inside. They need to chew through, and then there's 10 wounds of assault marines that you can just use as a screen. Because honestly speaking, if they die, it's not the end of the world. It's only 100 points.
Right. For sure. Yeah, like we said, that puts you at between those GTs and the Invitational that we talked about. You ended up getting to the grand finals. Go ahead, you can review the VOD of that video, if that game, if you wanted. That was an incredible game against Ashsea. That puts you at 14-3 over the last couple of events, which I think is a very impressive record for anyone, and especially talking about you know, non-Dark Angel Space Marines doing very well. Like we talked about earlier with True putting up some results, it's good to see that the folks from the Discord and the folks from TTS especially are able to potentially put to rest the idea that like TTS is somehow a subpar 40K
Yeah,
experience.
yeah. I mean, I don't like. I can see why they would say that, but I don't think it's an accurate representation. Maybe if you only play a couple games on TTS, but if you grind out enough games, you can definitely get more games on TTS, which is better practice.
Right. Yeah.
And there's also good habits that you pick up on, like checking line of sight, aura ranges, etc., that usually you might be an intro out of if you were to play IRL. So there's definitely some good habits to pick up, and also being able to play against anybody, against any type of list allows you to stress test the type of list you want to take to an event.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
especially because going to like playing at your local RTT or whatever, and going to a GT that potentially has kind of international participation are two very different things. Because a GT you could see literally anything. A good way to get that kind of experiences on TTS. But yeah, I think we'll go ahead and close it out there. Congratulations again on your excellent record over the last couple of games, and thanks for talking to me.
No problem, my pleasure.
So anyway, that's my interview with Fouchini about his games from the Kent War Games GT. Thanks everybody for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this style of video, a little bit different from the normal list videos that I've been doing recently. Let me know if A, you enjoy this subject material, because I'd love to do more of this kind of list, but also if you like this interview style. I think it was pretty fun to do, and I'm pretty happy with how it came out, but it did take a while to edit, which is why it's being released so late in the week. So yeah, let me know down in the comments how you enjoyed this video, and as always, I want to give a huge shout out to my patrons over at patreon.com/tacticaltortoise, also YouTube channel members and Twitch subscribers, everyone who keeps the lights on over here in the Tactical Tortoise HQ. I really appreciate it, and to everyone else, remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.